You know, English is a very funny language. Sometimes you'll find relationships within the words that are really quite mind blowing. We have a lot of words that are the same word that appear to be unrelated. So this morning, I was thinking about the word bank. And I've wondered, why do we have this thing at the side of a river bank? And we use the same word for these institutions that control the flow of money. Well, it's right there, isn't it? The bank is essentially the thing that controls the flow of the river. But now consider what it means to be either on the bank or in the river. When you're in the river, you're swept up by the flow of the current. But if you're standing on the bank, you don't have to worry about that. It's a comparatively safe place to be. That is, until the river swells up and changes its course. So in other words, until the bank loses control over the flow of the currency. Now, of course, in the natural world, the bank and the river have a dialectical relationship. It's a constant back and forth. And you could say that in many respects, what all of civilization is an attempt to do is to stop the river from moving. All of the buildings, all the artifices, all of those foundations, everything is trying to stop the flow from interfering with our bank. But of course, the longer you try to stop the flow, the more it builds up. Now I'm kind of speaking in broader terms, but I think this also applies probably at all levels of scale. But I think of it generally in terms of the Tao, like the nature and the universe has its way. And we can try to resist whatever changes are occurring within the largest domains. But ultimately, we are puny in comparison to, let's call it, the will of God, or the way things are, whichever you prefer, or the way things are changing. It's probably more accurate. And perhaps this is the most elegant way of describing why humanity can be seen as something that goes against nature. And indeed, those who are most committed to the maintenance of the establishments that are trying to hold on to their position on the bank so that they don't have to be with the hoi polloi in the river, those are just on the face of them. You can see that they have departed from nature. Quite often their bodies are bodies of people who have never had contact with nature. And so they are the ones who are the most afraid of the water because they've never gone in for a swim. And they're just maladapted to it. And so the question, the question that I have is, how do those of us who are in the river get some of those folks to come in for a swim without scaring the bejesus out of them, without them being just immediately swallowed up. In other words, how do we alleviate their fear of reality? Unfortunately, the bank has allowed them to establish quite a formidable aggressive force. And so they are, in a sense, you could say that war is an expression of the flow that they're trying to avoid, redirected by their own designs. But of course, the more that they punish the world with their explosive devices, the more quickly whatever stability remaining disintegrates. And so they are literally sawing off the limb that they're standing on. I mean, now I'm really mixing my metaphors, right? What are they doing in terms of a bank? I guess what they're doing is they're causing the river to rise. And so they're having to harden their fortresses all the time. And, patch leaks if they weren't made according to spec, or if they, let's say, utilized people who are part of the river who may have an interest in seeing their institutions crumble. I hope you get what I'm driving at there. Well, then they're just essentially running around the madhouse without a clue of, because these are people who don't know how to get their hands dirty. They're used to managing things on paper, or let's say on screens now. So I'm trying to paint a portrait of the situation that they find themselves in. Like, let's say that on some basic level, this is a description of Europe at the moment. They're used to managing things through, it's the bureaucratic state, right? Brussels. And they're used to managing things on the basis of, committees and policies. And now all of a sudden, they're confronted with having to actually pursue a war, to raise up an army. It's like, well, that's what they were relying on the United States for, right? And they accomplished that through the banking system. So, but let's remember that the banking system is the thing which mobilizes wars. And so, City of London, you think they're going to take this sitting down? If you consider the kinds of revelations that we learned about in the book The Great Taking, a recent, in the last few years, people have been discussing this a lot, which, essentially says that much of the paper floating out there that makes people believe that they have assets, if you look at the fine print, under certain conditions, those assets are not actually owned by the claimant. The real title is still held largely in the City of London. So, in essence, they can pull the plug on the global economy whenever the hell they want to. Now, I think there's a vanishingly small potential for actually doing anything about this, but I do think that one of the mistakes that typically happens, and maybe it's unavoidable, is that people get out the pitchforks. That's the metaphor that's often used. And the next thing you know, you're embroiled in a full-scale civil war because, they'll use the divide and conquer mechanism and shift the hostility to a patsy, a group of patsies, a scapegoat group. And we all know who's being set up for that one. So it just never addresses the root issue, which is that the people in the river and the people on the bank don't understand each other. Everyone in the river wants to be in the bank. And everyone in the bank is afraid of getting into the river. But you're really not living unless you get into the river. And, you want to get into the river, but you also want to be able to get back to the bank. And a lot of people never have stood on the bank for a moment. They don't know what it's like to not be in the full swirl of chaos that is life. They don't know what it's like to have a moment of peace. Well, maybe a moment of peace. But the feeling that there's actually something solid to stand on, which of course is a complete illusion, and which is what leads to the mental illness of the people who are trying to control the world. All right, I think that paints the picture. There's a tendency to try to offer some kind of remedy, and I guess I tried to insert something along those lines in the midst of this, but really, I mean, even if there is some understanding, I'm not sure the dynamics can't just play themselves out. I'm not sure this isn't just sort of a thermodynamic inevitability. So make of it what you will. But I'd say, whatever level of chaos it is that we're dealing with right now, prepare for it to get exponentially worse. Thank you for listening. If you're one of the very few people in this world who has a few spare shekels, every small amount is greatly appreciated. It helps to inspire continued efforts, and occasionally it buys me a coffee. So with that, I will direct you to taijireality.substack.com or patreon.com/taijireality. Hit the like button, why don't you? And I'll see you next time in a virtual way. Adios.